This morning, this morning, we began with a widening of our concept of the Mother, the Divine Mother, the Supreme Lord, recognizing their highest creative poise as originator of the universe, please, their immanent presence in everything and within us equally, as well as the particular form in which we, as devotees, disciples of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, have experienced them. But recognize that there is nothing in what we have described that limits it to these forms. Each person in any tradition, with whatever preferred Ishta Devata, form of divinity, even in human incarnation, can see through that form of their favored relationship the totality of the Divine Mother and the Supreme Lord. And it is in this sense that we have to understand our discussion. I also pointed out that this is the first basis upon which we can build a deep, intimate relationship with the Divine. But with this basis, there is still something distinct that is intended in the structure and framework of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. Most of you are already familiar with the framework Sri Aurobindo shares of the yoga tradition and the body of yoga knowledge itself, where he shows you that every major system of yoga that exists today is based upon some particular principle that it uses as a point of leverage to awaken our consciousness and direct it to union with the Divine. Yoga being essentially union with the Divine, there is no yoga without the Divine. We have to be very clear not to confuse the word yoga in the way you find it confused in the West and from where it has got re-imported into India as representing therapy. So they will say yoga for diabetes, yoga for toothache, yoga for headache, yoga for whatever. And therefore, because now yoga is therapy, you can have crystal yoga, crystal therapy, or laughter yoga, laughter therapy. No. Yoga being union with the Divine, your crystals will not give you self-realization. Laughter as an exercise will not lead you to deepening in the Divine immersion. So it is not yoga. It is complete perversion of the use of the word yoga to call it laughter yoga. Or as others have done, even other words they have thrown in and called it yoga. Dog yoga, cat yoga, all kinds of other. Therapy is not yoga. Yoga is not therapy. Yoga can be used as a therapy. And if anything, there is, of course, there's a knowledge because the yoga is the only science and technology of consciousness which bridges the highest spiritual through the intermediate gradations of psychology all the way to the most material physical working of the body. It is the one science that spans all the gradations of consciousness, and it is an applied technology which allows you to change, to transform, and to master all these gradations. And therefore, you can use it for therapy, including therapy of the body, therapy of the mind, therapy of the emotions. Yes, but that is a limited, specific use and an inferior use of that technology and the knowledge. Its intention is to something much larger. If anything, we can expand the word therapy to widen out by saying yoga is the therapy by which you get free of the suffering and the distress of the illusory smallness of your consciousness and you recover your true divinity. In that sense, it heals you to rediscover your divinity. Yes, one can expand the word therapy for that. But therefore, when you look at the various larger systems of yoga, Sri Aurobindo points out each uses a different lever starting point to build the link with the divine consciousness and for a specific outcome in that relationship. Hatha Yoga, he points out, using the physical body as the point of leverage, aims at developing the body consciousness and the life energy in a way that it can trigger eventually the opening of all the life centers of chakras and awaken the Kundalini at the base of the spine, by which the rising Kundalini above head will then open your individual consciousness to a cosmic consciousness. That is the goal. How many people do you know who claim to do Hatha Yoga are even thinking of this? You see, they take the portion of asanas or of pranayam for health, for well being, for exercise, etc. There is never the idea that this has to lead to this awakening of Kundalini or realization. Yes, there are a few, but they're rare, and you don't find them in the yoga teachers regularly. But this is the true sense of Hatha Yoga. And its starting point is the recognition that if I ask you to stop your mind, you cannot. If I ask you to stop your body and relax, you can. So use the lever of what you can most easily do to build to this spiritual awakening. And as a goal, it sets itself the perfection of the entire physical consciousness and life force in the body, which is why the Hatha Yogi can have these extraordinary capacities of physical health. Raja Yoga, on the contrary, starts by saying you are not body. You are mind, first of all. You are a Manomaya Purusha. You are thinking, conscious, mental being first, who has a body. So, use the lever of what you are already to be able to more rapidly attain to the same result. And so it uses primarily mental processes of observation, of concentration, of directing your thought. And through directing of mind, it can direct life energies and body. And thereby it uses a small selection of asanas and pranayam, but to build very rapidly to a mastery of mind, perfection of mind, which leads eventually to the samadhi of immersion in the divine consciousness. And this is the special feature of Raja Yoga. It too demands a full perfection, and therefore both Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga, you can see, are complementary in some sense. But both these systems are so demanding because they aim at a perfection that you cannot put them in practice in daily life. If I'm a teacher in a school, I cannot be doing Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga because it demands 9-10 hours of effort throughout the day, isn't it? I cannot be doing a job while I'm doing this. And it is strenuous, it is difficult. Not everyone can survive even the program if you look at it in its totality. But there are three other methods which we know as Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, which are not as demanding, which also use levers, but for a result which is much more rapid, though narrow in its scope. Through Karma Yoga, you consecrate your efforts. And through a process of consecration, you put yourself in relation with that to whom you consecrate. The example that I gave earlier this morning, where we were taught that the ashram, people in the ashram were in love with the mother. And so everything they did thinking of her, I'm doing this for the mother. Some of the examples are so beautiful. We have seen even today, those saris are there. A lady spent an entire year doing fine embroidery of an entire sari. And with such precision, such beauty, and such dedicated bhakti that you can feel that in the sari. And this was offered to the mother on her birthday, and the mother wore it once perhaps. But that was enough for her, it fulfilled her completely. But that 1 year, at every stroke of every thread, it was the mother, for the mother, immersed in the mother's consciousness. So it is an example to show you you can be doing any work, and in the spirit of the Karma Yoga, you will find it becomes your means for realization. Bhakti Yoga similarly takes the lever not of the will in work, but the heart's opening in self-giving of love, gratitude, devotion. And you'll see in the traditional forms of Bhakti Yoga, people will do all kinds of ceremonies of Bhakti, They will put to sleep a little baby idol of God, wear clothes, and go through all that. The specifics of what they do is not important. You could replace that baby idol of Sri Krishna by your own child and look after your own child as if it is God, isn't it? Or do the same thing to anybody in your family. You prepare food for your family members, whatever their age, it doesn't matter. You're preparing for the divine in them, perhaps. Or you prepare for the divine and then share with all humanity around you. So the work itself does not bind or limit, and you can be doing this in the midst of all work through the opening of the heart. And the same with Jnana Yoga, where the turn of the mind and its analytic process, its observing process, distinguishing the temporary appearance from the underlying more permanent reality, beginning to peel off layers of appearance, beginning to perceive the extraordinary wisdom that works behind the scenes, and thus awakening to that, it naturally leads to awakening of the heart with love and gratitude and wonder. Oh, what a beautiful universe it is, where everywhere there's this extraordinary wisdom, and the heart opens in adoration, and the actions automatically consecrate in gratitude and service. So Sri Aurobindo points out that although these three have different starting points, each leads to the consequence of the other two if done in that way. From karma, you will grow into bhakti and jnana. From jnana, you will grow into karma and bhakti you will grow into jnana and karma. But each of these and all of these together, it is possible to practice in the midst of all life. There is no limitation fundamentally. If any, the limitation is only of your ability to direct your attention at that moment. So these are applicable as we are where we are. They don't lead to as complete a mastery as Hatha and Raja, but still, they lead you to that result. Now, in all these 5 major systems, he shows you that the primary driver of effort is you. You have to make the effort. You can lapse, you can forget, you can fall asleep, you can get tired, and so your effort is limited by your capacity. There is a 6th system and a 6th principle which complements these 5, where the effort is not yours. And that is the system which we call Tantra. Tantra, not in the way Europe has redefined the term, which is completely wrong. It has nothing to do with Kama Sutra or sexuality. Tantra is the recognition of the world as the body of God formed by Shakti, and the consecration and self-giving to Shakti, asking her to do the work in us. This is the fundamental principle of Tantra Yoga, as you will see in Sri Vidya Upasana, those of you who may be familiar with these systems. And the focus is on Shakti by recognition that it is through the Shakti that God works in the universe. If you say the divine consciousness is there at the origin and the world is here, what links the two is Shakti and conscious divine Shakti. It is she who has formed us. It is she who has made our evolution across millions of years to this point where we wake up one day and say, I'm here for this reason. Okay? She built you. She built your intelligence. She built your devotion, etc. And so when you recognize she has done all the work, rather than saying, I am now so great, I'm going to be able to do more than she can, you would be a fool to say that. You will say instead, oh my God, you can do so much more than I and so much more rapidly if I give myself to you and participate consciously, collaborate by self-giving. So where through millions of years she had to push you against your resistance, now you give yourself and she carries you. You've seen people surfing a wave, as they say. What do you have to do? The wave carries you. You keep your balance, aligning in harmony with the wave so that the wave can push you. If you misalign, lose that balance of harmony, you fall. The wave continues, you are left behind. But as you maintain that right relationship, she carries you, isn't it? So in the approach or the principle of Tantra, the movement of self-giving and self-surrender to the Shakti directly and getting her to work in you is therefore dependent on her strength, not on yours. As a consequence, that path allows a very rapid growth. But if you see the methods of Tantra, it is so ritualistic, so complicated, etc. So Sri Aurobindo points to all these systems and says, don't get stuck with the forms in which they are applied. Look at the essential principles. And he formulates around this a practical application of the yoga, which he calls the integral yoga, through which, using all these levers simultaneously, and the common feature across all of them, you apply this in your life and enormously accelerate. And to put it in a certain context, he says, you achieve the aims of the Tantra by the methods of the Vedanta, fusing the two in a sense. This becomes the broad framework of the integral yoga and its practice. So this is not enough. At best, what you've done is found a way to unify the various systems. There's a fundamental difference in the goal of the yoga itself. While the existing yogas, as they survive, have as their principal goal realization of the divine consciousness, God realization, you may say. God is a word which is a bit undefined. So whatever it is, the idea that you have, realization. Sri Aurobindo's yoga does not stop with that. Because God realization is experienced by what? You, the inhabiting person. I attain, let's say, to some kind of a realization of some diviner consciousness. What happens to my body? It remains as it is. What happens to my emotions or my intelligence? Largely left behind as it is. So you have these aberrations of sometimes famous yogis who enter in deep state of trance, experience some kind of bliss. They come out and start behaving in the most crude and rude way, abusive, losing their temper. And even in certain Tibetan traditions, they call this, there's a name they give to it, crazy wisdom, they call it. Though it is not wisdom. It is animality. If it is crazy, it is animality. It is not wisdom. The person may have wisdom in some part, but this expression is not a form of wisdom. These are ways by which human beings deceive themselves. If you live in that wisdom, if you live in that bliss, then when you come out and you fall into layers which do not have that wisdom or that bliss, they are different things. They are not that. Recognize this difference. And rather than saying, oh, I am still in that, which is a way of fooling, and many of them have actually fooled themselves and got into serious trouble. Recognize that there is a part in you that experienced something higher. The rest of you did not participate. Is this good enough for you? Is this the divinity or the spiritual life that you choose? Well, there is no life which is spiritual then. Your life is as it was, your spirit has gone, and the two are separated and cannot meet. Sri Aurobindo points out that this is not the goal of evolution. In fact, what happens in evolution, each time you gain a higher grade of capacity or consciousness, even a little higher, it turns upon everything else and rebuilds everything in terms of its own image. Take a very simple act of eating food. We've all had very good food. You saw how the food was laid out and beautifully arranged with the correct balance of colors, flavors, tastes. If you give this food to a dog, do you know how he will eat it? Once I saw this dog and they gave a little bit of ice cream. The fellow was so excited, he rushed and he licked to the last drop and he was going, bam, 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 bam. Desperate, instinctive, driven. He quickly ate up his food and he wanted more. You give that to a human being. Oh, it's so beautiful. It tastes so nice. Oh, what a beautiful color. And this has so many flavors. I go to the shop, you have 20 flavors. Which would I like to choose? I'll taste a few. This has been mentalized. The same drive of hunger, even greed for food, has been lifted to a grade of mind and refined, turned into an aesthetic experience, even made beautiful, isn't it? And still in the same instinct, but lifted up, mentalized. And so it should be as we gain to a higher level of spiritual consciousness, it should turn upon all the gradations of mind, emotions, body, life, drives, instincts, spiritualize them. So that as great is the consciousness that you have attained, as great should be its reflection or its action or its expression in all of you, in all your parts. Your entire life must be lifted and divinized. Then it would be a divine or diviner life, isn't it? So in the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, this becomes essential. But we have to now understand and articulate this in a different way. The person attains to, let's say, a higher spiritual consciousness, but your nature, prakriti, also has to grow and become in her divine image, Para Prakriti or Daivi Prakriti. Acquiring a double liberation, soul liberated, but nature also liberated to her divine potential. So it's a different way of thinking, where in the traditional yogas, the person is liberated and nature is discarded. Even to the point where the person will say, oh, this is just mere body, destroy it doesn't matter. He feels the body as an impediment to his higher realization because now it pulls him back. Now we say, no, this is sacred. This body is the most precious thing given to you because it is the vehicle through which not only you can gain that higher spiritual experience, but you can gain the experience of all the gradations of consciousness in a single movement. There's a further secret to the body consciousness, which I want to highlight because you find this only in the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, in no other system. This recognition, which comes from the Vedas, that the physical world is the condensation of all the other gradations of consciousness. All these are held here, bound in form, which is why we have evolution. That which is bound naturally begins to then unfold and reveal itself more and more. So the life force emergent from stone becoming plant was concealed. The mind awakening in the animal and the human was concealed within. And the spiritual potential which awakes from human consciousness was also concealed. But when these emerge, they do not leave behind the matter, they drag the matter up with them. You see, stone, when it becomes plant, the substance of plant is still made of stone. Right? It is the same molecules of stone, sand, which the plant has eaten up and rearranged to become tissue of plant. You've seen those plants which are put in glass bowls, money plant. You have only water and the plant. And after 2 or 3 months, it has become this big plant. Made of what? Water. And whatever little molecules were there in the water, it has taken all that, rearranged and become this living tissue. What was dead stone becomes living tissue. Life force has transformed matter to become living matter. Or we, our biology or animals, we eat the plants, which was living matter, and make it conscious living matter. Your tissue is more conscious than the plant which you've eaten, but it's made of the same plants, right? So when the spiritual consciousness now takes up this, awakens in this body, rather than leaving it behind as it was half animal, it lifts this substance and makes of it, digests it, so to say, makes of it divine substance. That would be the logical culmination of evolution, isn't it? So divinized tissue would be the consequence of you attaining a diviner consciousness and leaning back to reshape, recast, rebuild this in terms of that. Logically, it makes sense. And so we realize that our nature should not be left behind. It too shall be divinized, and in a way that in the physical body alone you can have this experience of all the gradations here compressed being lifted to their full divine potential. And it is only in the physical body you can have the experience of all the gradations of the worlds all at the same time. If you go out of the body, as you've heard people go out of body experience or in dream state or even lucid dream state or in some state of higher spiritual absorption in samadhi, you have access to those worlds. You don't have access to the physical world. But in the body you can have access not just to physical but all worlds at the same time. If you want the most complete experience, totality of the divine who is all worlds, it can only be had through the physical body by divinizing it. This is the potential of the physical body. And no other system, no other tradition points out this deep truth. It is hinted at in the Veda, that's about it. But Sri Aurobindo brings it out explicitly as the inevitable next step in human evolution, of which we are on the threshold. This is why this whole drive of modern science and biology to get into the perfect knowledge of matter and also of biology. All the recent discoveries of the biology and the cellular working, etc., are intended basically as part of this exploration, but they are the most superficial part of it. With the awakening of the spiritual consciousness, this whole domain of possibilities now opens up. But therefore, in the integral yoga, the physical consciousness, the body and the substance of body itself, and all other gradations are taken up to be lifted and divinized. That's not enough. Already integral yoga, all this, there's more to it. The integral yoga is integral because it takes up all of you, all of your nature, including to divinize. Why is this important? Nothing is to be left out. Look back at the big picture of our evolution. You see, in the traditional ascetic yogas, particularly, where the goal is to get out of this, very simply. You look at the mind, oh, this is a domain of question and doubt and confusion. Abandon it. In the Buddhism, the whole goal is kill mind. Even it is taken to ridiculous extremes. You will say the Zen types, they will say, in the Zen tradition, they will say things like, if you see Buddha on the road, kill him. What are you talking about? And they'll give a whole complicated logic to justify that. These are mind games. They miss the point. The mind is not your enemy. The mind is an attempt of nature to build the vehicle for the divine omniscience. It's a half-formed vehicle. Rather than saying it is a cause of confusion and ignorance, kill it, you say, Sri Aurobindo says, perfect it and divinize it. You see the difference in thinking. And the same for our life energies, the pranamaya kosha and the emotions which flow with it. Oh, that's a cause of all your confusions and suffering. Your emotions, your attachment, your desires are your problem. Kill desire. That becomes then the ascetic way. And here Sri Aurobindo says, no, liberate them from their smallness and darkness and limitation, perfect them, divinize them. And so with the body. For the body, the worst abuses come from the more ascetic traditions, where the body is the cause of suffering and binding you in the world and so on. Well, this too is a half-formed vehicle. Perfect it and divinize it. Now, when you start thinking in this way, the whole perspective changes, and everything that has been built up already within you is half-built. Your work has been done for you by a larger evolution and divine wisdom, isn't it? So rather than discarding things which don't seem to work out, you take everything into the scope. Therefore, it's an integral yoga that takes up the fullness of all your being, all your nature, all the levels of consciousness to be integrated and divinized. But it is also integral because it uses every possible means as a lever. What we discussed, the 6 major systems, all of them are used. And one of the consequences of this is, it is a yoga you can practice in the midst of all life. You do not need to discard anything from your life. All means, all processes, all experiences, all responsibilities can be made into a means of the practice of a divinization of life. You see, every specialized system will say, oh, to do this, you must abandon that, or you must be of this type. Sri Aurobindo says the integral yoga has 3 outstanding features. I'm putting them out of sequence, but one of these is this, that every activity of life is taken up. Nothing needs to be discarded, irrespective of what work you do. Another outstanding feature is that it does not have a prerequisite. You start where you are, because your goal is to perfect everything. In other systems, if you don't have bhakti, you can't do bhakti yoga, isn't it? If you don't have temperament of jnana, you can't do jnana yoga. So there are people who say, I am a bhakta, I am a jnani, please go your different schools. You can't meet each other. But here you will say, it doesn't matter, that's your starting point for the whole. Oh, that's your starting point for the whole, but we are together in what we do. It's a big difference, because the goal is all-inclusive. But the first of the 3 outstanding features, he says, is very interesting, that there is no fixed sequence of processes. There are processes, there are sequences, but they are not fixed. They are adapting to each person's requirement. You see, if somebody begins from the poise of bhakti, somebody else begins from the poise of jnana, the sequence is different. But eventually the jnani will have to acquire bhakti, bhakti will have to acquire jnana. Sequence has changed, but the processes are there still, isn't it? And within the bhakti, there are sequences. Within the jnana, there are sequences. Again, according to your temperament, some of those will change. According to your stage of sadhana, because it is multifaceted, multidimensional growth. One part has grown too much, it is put on pause while other parts catch up and are integrated. Then again, some other part grows and it's put on pause until other parts catch up. So the sequencing is not absolute, which is one of the reasons why people misunderstanding this statement will say, oh, but there is no special process. No, not true. Unfortunately, people have not read or have not understood who speak like that. And there's too much of this loose talk. There are people who will go as much as to say, oh, you just surrender your life to the mother, do your work and she will do the sadhana. Then Sri Aurobindo didn't need to write so many things, isn't it? There's even, I have to say this because many of you might have heard these words. Please do not believe everything you hear. There are even those who will quote from the mother, where she says, and she writes this, be simple, be happy, be quiet, open yourself to me, do your work as well as you can, and that is all that is asked of you. Wow, what a beautiful sadhana. Be simple, be happy, be quiet, open yourself and do your work. Where is the sadhana? Very simple, isn't it? Why did Sri Aurobindo write so much? This was a message given to Champak Lalji. Champak Lalji was busy looking after the mother 24 hours literally. Yes, he would sleep occasionally for a few hours. He didn't have time to eat. He had to catch up with the pace of the mother. She was working so rapidly, she had 10 assistants who were chasing to keep up. Okay. Many times in the middle of the night, she would look at the watch. Oh, it's 4 a.m. already. Let's start the next day. She's continuing a hurricane of power, and others are chasing to keep up. So in this condition, Champak Lalji tells the mother, how do I do sadhana? How can I sit for meditation? I don't even have time to eat properly. To him, she gave this message. But specific word there is, remain always open to me. He's sitting right next to her, working all the time. With the intensity of her force, remain open. Why? Because she warned of this. That intensity of her force, people around her tended to close and block it because it was too intense. You know, Champak Lalji had sometimes rage, anger. Why? Because people asked, why is it he's next to you and he's so crude in his anger? Because it's too intense to bear and they block themselves. So if you see, every detail of what is given to him was specific to his role while he was serving her. It's not something which you can take as your sadhana itself. It's a big mistake. Be very careful also of those who will quote the mother wrongly, where she will say, oh, here is this mantra I found, Om Namo Bhagavate, for the working of the cells. And she says, if Sri Aurobindo was alive now, he would have certainly reviewed his position. Something like that she says. It's in the agenda. And people take that out of context. So see, now the yoga has changed. You have to abandon everything Sri Aurobindo taught. Now just do this. Repeating mother's name, Nama Japa, that's your way. If it was that, then why would you again bother to go into all this? Nama Japa was always there for thousands of years. No big deal. Actually, the context is completely wrong. I've given a whole talk about this, and for those of you interested, perhaps you can take a look at that. The entire text, mother starts by saying she was working, she had already attained to the highest divine consciousness, and she was working to bring that into the cells of the body, to make each body's cell conscious of the divine. At that point, in the body consciousness within the cells, she found, because the cells have a natural tendency of rhythm of the body, that the rhythmic repetition of the mantra was helpful to help the cells to attune themselves to this action of their force. And she says that, I'm doing this constantly even when I'm talking to people while sleeping and while doing all activities. Now, if you think about it, if you did Nama Japa as repetition, how could you do that while talking to somebody? You can't. You can't do that while you're sleeping. So obviously she's not talking of Japa in the usual sense. She's speaking of the rhythmic repetition in the cellular consciousness. So the whole context of that text is so different. Do not get carried away by a wrong interpretation. These are some examples I'm giving because there's a lot of loose talk. I even had a friend who had joined the ashram, and every chance he got, when there was a break, he would go to the samadhi, concentrate and come back to work. And people around him got upset because they were not doing that. They were busy doing other things on their computer, watching their social media. I said, this is not how you do yoga. Why? What should I do? No, do your work. Mother will do the yoga. No. So don't go for these errors. So we will come back to the larger sense of the form of the practice. We have come to this critical distinction that everything has to be taken up in the sadhana, all has to be transformed and divinized. And the basic principle is take everything that you're aware of and open it to the divine and put it in relation to the divine. Now, very simply, all the yoga could be reduced to this one guideline. It's not enough, obviously, but this is the basis. Out of this, then we will develop finer, more distinct, specific stages. And so we will come from here to the broad framework of the integral yoga, which when Sri Aurobindo received this framework from Sri Krishna while he was in the jail and then he developed it, it was given in a structure of 7. Sapta Chatushtaya, 7 with 4 steps in each of the 7. Will not be going too much into the detail of the structure, only focusing on the part that is directly applicable to us in our sadhana. Because it is not enough to have bhakti. Bhakti is not bhakti yoga. It's not enough to do karma. Karma is not karma yoga. It's not enough to have jnana and read. Jnana is not jnana yoga. There's a specific thing you have to do which makes it yoga, isn't it? Again, a lot of confusion around this in the US, in some of the centers. They would say, Karma Yoga week, please come and join us. So people go there, Karma Yoga, let's all do, we clean up the place, we work. That was Karma Yoga. No, it was not. In Delhi, they use the correct word, they call it Shramadhan, offering of your efforts. Or they will say Kar Seva. Seva, service, is not Karma Yoga. They must understand these distinctions. So I'm highlighting these so that we don't slip into those errors. So when we do the framework, when we follow the framework of the integral yoga, you must understand having bhakti is good, but it's not enough. You must turn it into the form of yoga. So the first of these stages is a preparatory stage. From the 7, Sri Aurobindo structures it. The first one he puts as a broad base upon which the 6 limbs of the integral yoga are set. And this is the way he structures it in his synthesis of yoga. So this first base is an initial phase of overall purification and integration of your consciousness around your central aspiration. When we all say we have this aspiration to grow in consciousness in relation to the divine, well, whatever your starting point, it may be in the jnana, it may be in the bhakti, it may be in the consecration of your works, wherever the starting point, build around that an integration across all these layers, generally, broadly. Bring the sense of consecration and relation to the divine in all activities, broadly, generally. This is easy to do by constant remembrance and dwelling in whatever work you do. In the example we took, think of the Divine Mother in all you do and do it as a consecration to her. If you find that difficult, from there, especially if your work involves something more material, think that you're doing this job. Obviously, you're not doing it for her on a physical level. You're doing this job for Mother India. And that's your service to her, isn't it? Or broadly, generally, I have to do this. Someone has to do this. I'm doing it for you, Mother. Even I don't see how it's directly helping you, but it's helping your work in the world. Fine. But something by which overall all parts of you are turned generally Godward, and it's a base of purification and integration, which ideally would eventually settle with the poise and influence of the source of your deepest aspiration, which is the psychic being within you. It is that which recognizes the mother. It is that which awakens in you the urge for this higher, completer perfection of your life and a divinization. And its influence now coming forward more and more will be the integrating center around which generally your whole life will turn. So I'm presenting this in a very broad, general way. You can see how the Trimarga can be used, Karma, Bhakti, Jnana, in some combination. Details are not important. The overall turn and integration is important, especially around the psychic center. This being a broad base, now the 6 limbs of the yoga we take up step by step. And again, I will highlight the part which is of immediate and critical importance. So the first of these limbs, Sri Aurobindo refers to as the Shanti, or sometimes Samatha Chatushtaya. The base here is of Samatha, Shanti, and its consequence of Sukha and Hasya. These are terms he has used. So It's not important. The term is not important. I will convey the main idea behind. Samata, equality. And equality leaning back into a deep peace gives you naturally as a consequence a certain underlying delight in all activity and the ability for you to face all circumstances of life as from the soul's poise, like a child experiencing the whole world as a playground. This is the hasya. Literally every experience, oh wow, what an interesting thing. Oh, what an interesting possibility now of growth. And even the most difficult circumstance, you'll say, my God, what a challenge. This, if I can overcome, I will learn so much, I will grow so much. I've never faced this. How interesting. You look at children playing video games, you give them an easy game, they'll get bored, they want to go to higher next level. Until it matches their current capacity. If it becomes too strong, initially you'll find it actually kickstarts your sense of challenge. Wow, this I should be able to do. They make extra effort. So ideally you have a graded sequence and life is doing that already for you. But every now and then when you get this extra challenge, you say, my God, will I even survive this? What happens in the video game? The child never says, will I die? You see, in the video game, you die. And what do? You restart. Or you continue where you left off. Second life, third life, fourth life. Right? The soul's perspective is like this. Because we never die. We are immortal as soul. And really, when you become conscious more and more of the psychic presence within you, you will feel the sense of immortality. You have always been, you will always be. It is the one thing real in the world which nothing can destroy. I am forever. You have the sense of that immortality. And I'm free, and in the poise of that freedom, you look at the whole universe as this gigantic playground of infinite possibilities, and with the wonder that you have, wow, what a life, what an experience, what a video game, if that be the reference. You see? And this becomes natural from that poise, and this is the sense of that hasya as a consequence. And however difficult, it's beyond my capacity, I will ask for help. You see, when there are these games which are very difficult, they will have a hotline. Call the hotline. In the game, you can only call once. In real life, you can call infinite number of times. Hotline is Divine Mother. Divine Mother, help me. What do you do when you're in the playground and playing and something goes wrong beyond your capacity? Mama, help me. Right? She's always there. Call on the hotline. The result is the growth that the challenge gives you becomes part of the game. Inevitably, you know you will conquer. If not in 10 days, in 10 years, doesn't matter. But I will conquer and I will grow as a consequence. I will become greater master of my circumstance. So the attitude of the hasya is so liberating. It is such a joyous play of life. Nothing you will ever see as, oh, now I am overwhelmed, my life is ruined. That will never exist. Depression will be gone. Yes, you have setbacks. You will feel a little bad. Hey, I missed this chance. I was not careful enough. Now I'll be more vigilant. But you have eternity before you. You have all the time, isn't it? So the consequence is this sukha, a general contentment in everything, and a hasya, this playful nature of the discovery. But what is causing this consequence? Two words, samata and shanti. Equality and deep peace. Now, of this, Sri Aurobindo explains, and I will highlight this especially because it is so critical. It is at the very base of all the sadhana of the integral yoga. And if you have not worked upon this, your base is unstable. I'm going to read from Sri Aurobindo a line because it is so powerful and compelling. He says, the first business of the sadhaka is to see whether he has the perfect equality, how far he has gone in this direction, or else where is the flaw? And to exercise steadily his will on his nature, or invite the will of the Purusha to get rid of the defect and its causes. First business of the sadhaka. We have not begun our sadhana unless we have got through the first business, isn't it? So work on building this equality. Why? And he explains because as long as you're swept away by the circumstances pulling and pushing, you cannot master them. Remember, the goal is to divinize everything and to master everything as a consequence. And if you're going to master your circumstances, you cannot be swayed by them. You have to be on a poise of stability. As the circumstances sway, you have to be stable from which you can apply your mastery. Equality, therefore, becomes the foundation for everything. Now, the methods of equality you will read, you will follow if it interests you, to various means and to deepen, and stages of that also. I don't go into that. But you will notice the deepest equality is a natural consequence of immersion in the self. Because self is all equal, eternally, isn't it? Infinitely. It is the one thing which upholds the whole play of infinite creation of universe, and even the greatest supernova, it upholds with the same equality as a little blip of a wave in the waters. So as you lean back to presence of self, there is a natural equality which invades from inside out. Ultimately, it will be this equality which will be your true foundation. But first you begin with an effort and an application of your mind's consciousness. But the mind can never give you true equality. It will give you a first base from which you can deepen to this true poise. But the second word which follows the equality is Shanti. It is a deep peace. It is an active, positive power of the self that fills you. You've experienced this at times when you have gone to a sacred space, or when you have gone to the Samadhi, you've gone to the Matrimandir perhaps, or at the center. You come into that place and you can feel this deep, intense, almost solid, palpable peace. That is the first glimpse of the presence of the self. That you must then allow to invade you and fill you and suffuse you down to the most material physical tissue. The more deeply you can allow it to fill you, literally soaking like liquid, soaking it, the more deeply you can soak it, the more it is held in you and you carry it when you leave the space. The more you learn to lean back and rest in it, the more it will grow and intensify in you. And it is power of self. And so you're actually deepening in immersion in the influence of the self as you do this. So you can see equality, samatha, and shanti, peace. These two are the natural foundation for all the rest that will follow in the sadhana. Work upon this consciously every day. Perhaps you can't do it all the time during the day. Start your day with this. Put yourself in the poise of samatha and of deep shanti to whatever extent you can receive. End your day with that again. And if you can, in between, take pauses in the day when you will pause and remember that, oh, this is what it felt like. And as you remember, let it invade you again. And then re-engage with the work you were doing. Take a short pause, reconnect, and from the new poise, re-engage. If you're a teacher taking classes, you have pauses between classes. Stop for a while. If it helps you, close your eyes and deeply recover in immersion, and then again re-engage. If you've done the practice once in the morning before you start your day, getting back to it will be easy. And perhaps you will take 2 or 3 minutes. Or after a while, you might find in a few seconds you'll be able to lean back and hold and call it back. And then you will notice each time that you do this, from that point on, your effectivity in the class that you take, and I'm addressing this especially to the faculty also who are watching. Each time the effectivity of your communication in the class and the power of your expression will be greater. When you lose that poise, everything dims. And this is true of every activity, whatever you may do. You're doing business, you're doing some service, you're in the midst of some creative process as an artist. Everywhere your power and effectivity will be amplified when this comes forward. They will diminish when this fades out. You will notice this and you will actively want to bring this back again and again until some part of you continues to live in this samatha and shanti, equality and peace. And as a consequence, increasingly there will be this contentment, sukha, and the play of the psychic influence growing, the sense of the hasya and the joy of the play that is life. It comes naturally from this poise of equality because that's the nature of the self and the soul's relationship with the world. So this is the first limb of the integral yoga. Now we're going to describe 6 limbs. All these can go in parallel. Remember, no fixed sequence. But there is a natural sequence of priority. If you have done the equality, the other 5 would be easy. If this is not stable, the other 5 would not be so easy. But you don't have to wait for the completion of this before you put the other 5 in practice. So start with this, start with the others. As this grows, the others will be more effective. As they grow in effectivity, they will help this also. They will all mutually help each other. And yet there's a prioritization. Okay? So you understand the fluidity and the flexibility in the practice still has a certain basis of sequence of priority. So this is the first limb, Shanti Chatushtaya. The second is Shakti Chatushtaya. Shakti is the power. Here's a yoga which actually tells you must amplify your power and effectivity. What do you find in the ascetic yogas? Money is bad, throw it away. Power is bad, it will corrupt, discard it, withdraw from the world. So Sri Aurobindo points out, across the last 2000 years, let us say, we threw away wealth and we threw away power. The Asura took it and then took over the world, and then you complain, oh, the world is ruled by Asuric interests. You gave it up, isn't it? But the ascetic influence is so deep in us that we actually can't think otherwise. There's been a deep programming. So I remember once I had gone to a certain school where they were learning traditional texts, and I spoke to them about the necessity of regaining wealth and power. And they had trouble first. Then I said, but you worship Lakshmi? Yes. That is wealth? Yes. Wealth is good? Yes. Hesitating. Okay. You worship Kali? Yes. That is power? Yes. Power is good? Yes. Okay. So we went through this a few times. And really, the young students were trying to internalize. Afterwards, one of them was accompanying me. We were going back to the airport. And then he said, but Shraddhaluji, tell me, I have a problem. I said, what? I don't understand how something which is bad can be treated as good. I said, what do you mean? Money. He went back to the old habit of money is bad. How can you treat it as good? Because it is so deeply programmed. We just had a session where he shifted and the mind slid back. And I'm pointing this because this is so important. It is one of the reasons why the youth of today do not turn to the ascetic spirituality. They refuse it. The instinct of the nation spirit does not want to throw away the aspect of wealth or power, because that is also divine. And to master these is part of the divine perfection. And so when you offer to them a spirituality which says power is bad, money is bad, become weak and helpless and poor, and you will be rewarded in heaven, that's what comes from Christianity and other things. No thanks. I will do that when I retire, when I don't need all those things, when I'm ready to, I can't do anyway, the tiger cannot chew the meat. So it's one of the reasons why in many of the centers we do not have enough young people coming. Because we have too much molded or been molded by the ascetic influence. And this is not acceptable to the youth, to the spirit of the rising spirit of the nation, or even the world, across the world. I had a chat with one of the major ascetic traditions of India, which has many monks and very high quality. Not all are like that. It's one of the very high quality, deep, rich. I don't need to name it. And one of the things they said, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we used to have about 100 applications per month to become monks. Today it's down to 3 or 4. And they're very strict. They don't let everyone become a monk. You know, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, twice he applied to the Ramakrishna Mission wanting to become a monk. They said no. You see, they have their own test. Are you ready for that? No, you have to go back. But he has lived as a monk and done his sadhana in the world from that poise of equality and detachment. Therefore, he can be effective despite the circumstances. Therefore, he can be master of all these assaults of circumstances and stand firm. And this is a good example of a Rajarshi, King Rishi. I don't know what attainment he has in terms of the Rishi aspect, but the tendency, the temperament, the overall turn of nature is in the Rajarshi mold. That's why he can be so effective. It's a good example for us of how you can be in life in the most corrupt, the most perverse domain of battle of power and wealth and corruption, and still he stands firm. I don't think you'll find another example of him. It's difficult to see, and it's difficult to see a successor for him, for this criteria at least. But there are people, I'm sure there are, and more will come, because he has set a certain precedent. But the point I'm coming to is the second Chatushtaya is Shakti Chatushtaya. And we want, remember, the goal is to divinize everything. Divinize your nature. What does that mean? It must be able to amplify its power and effectivity in its action. Remember, the goal is not abandonment and poverty and weakness. It is perfection. And the perfection for the divine action in the world, it should be able to overcome all opposition. Perfectly, flawlessly, without limitation. So Shakti Chatushtaya is the amplification of the power aspect to its full intensity. Now, what the scope of that is quite amazing, and there are 4 words he uses to describe this also. So first there is the Shakti, then there is the Virya, Daivi Prakriti, and Shraddha. I'll dwell upon these briefly. But this aspect is not going to be for you the immediate priority, but it will be a general tendency. Okay? Because as we are, depending on where we are and the kind of temperament, swabhava, as well as work we have to do, amplification of the power is not of immediate urgency, perhaps, for most of us. Nevertheless, you must be conscious of this and allow this to happen. And there are 4 facets of it. And of these 2 facets, at least, you'll find are important and of immediate relevance. So let's go through the 4. The first is Shakti, which means in all 4 layers of your consciousness, there has to be an enormous amplification of energy. Physical body, you should be able to act with force without limit, as much as the body requires. You should be able to work continuously as long as you want. And I'm sorry, I'm going to give you this example again of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. You see how in 24 hours he has hopped across 3 time zones of 3 different countries and met with delegations one after another with full energy. I remember it was while he was in the US, he was in the Navaratri, he was fasting, taking mostly water and some juices. And he had 65 meetings one after another. And towards the end, he met with the US president with the same force. And that man was shocked that he's been fasting for so many days. This is actually possible and should be natural as a consequence of the sadhana. So amplification of life energy in the body would be one, but also in the vitality in the prana would be the other. The third would be in the chitta, in the consciousness, mind substance, and then the third in the fourth in the intelligence itself. And there are different gradations of energy. In all 4 they will be amplified. Of these, 1 or more of these will be more natural to you. Some who live more in the mind will find the application of the intellectual energy first. The rest will follow. Others who live more in the prana, that will amplify first, but the others will follow. But all gradations, the amplification of energy of that grade, and 4 gradations Sri Aurobindo describes, is a necessary process of this second limb of the integral yoga. But this is Shakti. Then comes Virya. And this is quite remarkable. The Virya is the amplification of the 4 powers of the soul. You see, we described the 4 layers in nature. But soul power is what comes from inside, fills nature. 4 soul powers, do you know what they are? They are the basis of the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra principles. There are 4 turns of the soul aspiration corresponding to the 4 powers of the Divine Mother, Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati. And the 4 aspirations of the soul, basically all 4 exist in all of us. One of these is more developed or evolved or more intensely projected, which often defines the overall turn of your nature. So in one in whom the Brahmana temperament is stronger will spontaneously turn to knowledge. The one on whom the Kshatriya temperament is stronger will spontaneously turn towards strength and heroism. And the one in whom Vaishya temperament is stronger will spontaneously turn to exchange and abundance, creating abundance or participating in abundance. And the Shudra temperament will turn towards perfection in work, in action, precision, self-giving, in service. For example, a perfect nurse in a hospital, even a doctor, should have the Shudra Bhava. You're here to serve the patient. If there you try to bring Kshatriya Bhava, it will not work. Vaishya Bhava will be totally contrary, isn't it? If you're not doing this as a service, you will not be a good nurse or a doctor for that matter. Perfection, precision in skills, again, is part of the Shudra Bhava. Now, I'm pointing to this first as an overall thing in the form of human temperament, but here the recognition is all four are soul powers. All four soul powers have to be amplified to their maximum. Now, there's also a power aspect, but from a deeper inside-out power amplification of soul qualities. And all four to be equally developed and integrated eventually. Again, starting with that which is most natural to your Swabhava first. What would be the consequence of that? So, for example, in this case, the amplification of the Brahmatej would be the intensification of the turn to knowledge, but also the ability to handle knowledge and the rising to higher gradations of knowledge itself. There's an inferior knowledge and a higher knowledge. The higher knowledge is that which perceives underlying oneness and the multiplicity as a turn or facets of oneness. The lower knowledge is that which gets lost in the multiplicity of knowledge and divided specializations. Well, both will get amplified. In the Kshatriya Tej, as it goes, the consequence will be increase of heroism, and in action, the effectivity of action, which leads to success necessarily, isn't it? So as a consequence of the integral yoga, you will find increasing effectivity in what you do and the attainment to success in whatever you do. And this is a necessary consequence and necessary to the yoga itself. Otherwise, how are you a divine being or a divine instrument if you cannot reach to a basic success in what you do? You see, why this is so important, I'm highlighting this a little bit because imagine if this is presented to the youth of today. Here is your means to attain success. Do you see how attractive the yoga itself becomes? And instead we turn it around and we say, you have to abandon everything in order to do yoga. Give up all your desires, give up all your ambitions. Thank you, I will come back to you later when I retire. And here I will say, here is your means to attain to that. Except, we will not chase after fake ambitions and desires. We will seek that which is the deepest aspiration of your soul and the turn of your Swabhava, and seek the fulfillment and perfection of that potential, that with which you were born and for which you were born. Don't follow imitating others. And there we will show you the means to success. And this is the Kshatriya Tej, and there is the Vaishya Bhava, which leads to abundance, but also success in what you do, in whatever you take up. And the enjoyment is a part of this. Here is something which also is very contrary to the ascetic traditions, where don't enjoy. Enjoyment will trap you by the desires. No, you're intended to enjoy. The world is a domain of the Leela, of the play of the divine consciousness in varied possibilities, and we are here for the enjoyment of it. But there's an inferior enjoyment which binds you to something lesser, and even the quality of enjoyment is crude and coarse. And there's a superior enjoyment in which you can enjoy the fullness and the richness of all things by a detachment from narrow fixation. And it is to this greater enjoyment that we are being led. And this is part of the Vaishyatva. And then there is the Shudra temperament, which is the love and service and self-giving, and the movement of self-giving to the divine is part of the Shudra temperament. And the more that grows, the more perfectly you become the servant of the divine, an instrument of the divine working. So you see, all four are innately seen from a spiritual potential and the spiritual effect as the soul's relation to the divine and as aspects of the divine powers working through the soul. And these have to be amplified to their maximum. So this is the Virya of the Shakti Chatushtaya. Remember the four, two more to follow. The third is the Daivi Prakriti. This is the fullness or infinity of the divine energy filling you, and now taking up all this basic work that you've begun and amplifying all to its fullness of infinity. Now, this word infinity is a bit problematic because we have no experience of what infinity is like. We only know pieces and finiteness, more or less, something is known in relation to another. But this is, in fact, the nature of the divine, of the self, that it is infinite and indivisibly infinity. And so it is something which is difficult for us to conceive, but when we experience it, we say, oh wow. You go on top of a mountain and look at this vast expanse, you touch a little bit of the infinity and say, ah, it feels so good. You feel free, you feel light, you feel vast, you feel complete. And this is barely the first touch of the nature of the infinity. And yes, nature gives you that experience in those spaces. Sometimes you can even have it in the midst of something. You sit looking out of the window, you stare and beyond, and somehow you turn, or you lie down on your back on the terrace and look at the sky and just open out to the vastness. And suddenly you find yourself as if touched by or drawn into this opening to infinity, and you get a glimpse of this. And if you watch carefully, stay with it, allow it to deepen, you will feel within it a touch of eternity. And it's there. It's as easy as this. Do this as an exercise. Familiarize yourself with this touch of the infinite, touch of the eternal. Sri Aurobindo makes this very interesting observation. He says, in the Indian civilization, this opening to the infinite and eternal has been worked upon for so long, it is almost as if infused as a backdrop. And he says the Indian mind is naturally familiar with the sense of the eternal. And I'm going to highlight this because he has said it on his authority. I can quote him and say, look into yourself and you'll find this is true. Let this awaken. Let this come forward. Let this become more and more your sense of a normal underlying presence. So all that I have described so far, does it feel practical, doable? There's nothing which is difficult or impossible. Would you agree with that so far? Yes, you have to put a little effort. That's within your reach. So the Daivi Prakriti is when that pours through all that you have worked upon and fills it and begins to amplify it towards infinity. You don't have to do it. She fills and does it. But you have to set the initial process in place and the infinity begins to fill you. And the last, the fourth of this Shakti Chatushtaya, all this is supported and complemented by you acquiring or building a relationship with the working of Shakti in you by a faith, Shraddha. By faith in her working that allows her working now to become more and more direct. Now this relationship of Shakti's working and faith is very deep. I'll just touch upon the idea just so that you can get a glimpse of what that means. When the Shakti works in you, fills your hand, let us say, if you say, yes, but I'm sure this is not possible, you've closed your receptivity. When something within you says, yes, I feel familiar and I know this can be done, then the flow goes right through and does. Okay, I'll give another example. As students, we were taken to the jumping board 5 meters high from the water and told to jump. You've seen children doing that? They come on the edge, you feel fear, oh, I won't survive, you pull back. You feel fear, you pull back. At some point, the child suddenly experiences a click, yes, I can do it, and poof, they jump. Notice this. You're jumping across a gap. Okay, there's a big hole, you have to jump across the hole. You try to jump, I can't do. And then the moment you find in yourself the part that says, yes, I can do, poof, you're able to do it. I once had this occasion where I was in some conference, and at the end of it, they had people doing firewalking. So they had invited these firewalkers. It was in Bangalore, traditional firewalkers. They did some prayer, puja, and then they walked across hot coals, 2 or 3 meters in length, bed of hot coals. It was so hot, if you stayed 2 meters away, you could feel the heat, and it was too much. And you see these people walking. And immediately after, several people ran across from the audience. And they weren't burnt, so everyone is looking, oh. And then a few said, oh, if you can do it, I can do it. And then they ran across. And I said to myself, this is my chance in life. If I don't do this now, I'll regret for the rest of my life. So I stood on the edge, and my entire body was paralyzed. I couldn't move because there was not the conviction that I can do it. I knew I would be burnt. Held, and gradually the consciousness pulled up to a point where I found the click. Yes, I can. And at that moment, the body began to walk. I crossed the whole thing slowly. I didn't run. I crossed slowly. The full bed of hot coals came on the other side, and the consciousness fell back. Hey, where's the burn? Where's the burn? Where's the burn? I don't feel the burn anywhere. And then my attention went to the feet. Is it there? Is it there? Is it there? Finally, I found a point. Yes, there it's feeling hot. I've come out. And now the sting starts. And I get a little bit of a reddish welt on both feet. I was looking for it. I found it. The faith in the body which gives to it the immunity. And where is the faith? In those people who did the prayer, it was faith in God. God will protect me, or my deity to whom they did the puja will protect me. Those who followed afterwards had the faith, if they can do, I can do. I am not different. My body is same. And then there were those who had the science faith. Instead of faith in God, they had a faith in science. And science told them, you know what, when you walk like this, there's a layer of insulation. It's called the, I forget the word, some effect, Leidenfrost effect, where a little bit of steam forms, insulates your souls from the coal, and so you don't get burnt. This is science. Of course, it's nonsense. Because your feet press hard. You do get the full impact of the heat. There's no Leidenfrost effect here. Leidenfrost effect is when you put a drop and the drop is floating because below it's evaporating continuously. Here you're not floating, you're pressing solid foot, dried totally. There's no Leidenfrost. But your belief in science, science will protect me, that takes you through. Faith. In what? It doesn't matter. Faith in your consciousness, turned to whatever reason, is what takes you through. So this faith has a critical role, Shraddha. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, Yo yat Shraddha saivasa. What is your faith is what you become. I know I am this. Obviously, I become that, isn't it? If you find in yourself the faith, oh, I can do this, from there comes your capacity to do. Effectively, you will look back at your entire growth process. Each was a discovery of an underlying deeper faith, which now made you more capable and more capable and more capable. So it is in the working of the Shakti. The Shakti is always there. But when you lack the faith of its action in you, you are limiting its action. The point where you say, yes, I can and she can, you open to the full flow of her faith, of her working. So this relationship of faith and Shakti is critical, and through this, part of this Chatushtaya of the amplification of power is the faith in her working. And there are two aspects to the faith. One is the faith in the working of Shakti, the other is faith in the divine consciousness from whom she flows. And that is as if the faith in the destiny and the way from there is held the full vision of what has to unfold. There are two aspects to the faith. It's a nuance, right now not important. Let your faith in the divine grow. Let the faith in the divine mother's working grow. Let the faith grow in your thinking, in your feeling, even in the body tissue. When that happens, you'll find yourself automatically receiving her working. Again, I'll give an example. In certain traditions, they have very scary kinds of test for truth and falsehood. So in certain villages, they'll take a hot burning metal, red hot, and the person is told, you lick this. If you're telling a lie, you'll be burnt. If you're telling the truth, you won't be burnt. I don't know if you have seen these. It exists all over the world in different traditions. And some variation of that. Hold with your hand, coal, lift it. If you're telling a lie, you will be burnt. If you're not, you won't be burnt. That faith. It's a test of your faith. The moment you have lied, you know that you will be burnt. And so you are burnt. And when you have the strength of the truth on which you stand, I have not stolen, I will show you. That faith is what prevents the burning. And to build the faith in the body consciousness is a critical part also. It is what gives you immunity from disease. And you see how that works in you? You have been programmed with the faith, I have to take medicine to get cured. Right? Except the medicine given to you was a sugar pill, you didn't know. But you had the faith that this medicine will cure me, so you got cured. They call it placebo effect. What is placebo? Faith. Not only that, the faith goes even deeper sometimes. Medicine, yes, but my doctor has not convinced me that I'll be cured. So I'm waiting in my bed. Doctor has come. Now I get up. I'm already feeling half cured. Has that happened to you? You're in bed, drained out. Doctor is coming. You feel already better. Doctor says, don't worry. This is nothing. Here, take this tablet. You'll be well. I take the tablet in my hand. I have not swallowed it. I'm already half cured. Have you felt that? It's actually so effective, the transmission of faith. An effective doctor is one who is able to transmit faith. The medicine is a vehicle, it's the instrumentation for the faith. And then there's a factor X. If you can also plug into that, you have the miraculous cure. I'm going to digress, I'm sorry, but this is going to be helpful for you to really appreciate the fullness of this. There's an example of one doctor, Ramachandra, in the ashram. He was a homeopath. And he had miraculous cures. People would go to him and come back healed from things which were thought incurable. So he had a reputation in Pondicherry, and in those days there was the French consulate. Somebody in the French consulate had fallen sick and he was on deathbed. Everything had failed, he was dying. The priest had been called, he had started to do the prayers. He was a Christian, so they were doing prayers the Christian way. He's going to die anytime. Someone in the family said, let's try Dr. Ramchandra. So imagine at that point you're calling a doctor. Ramchandra comes, looks at the symptoms. Okay, he pulls out from his medicinal box some homeopathic thing, pops it in his mouth, he swallows. Then Ramchandra says, in 1 hour, either he will die or he'll be fully cured. And then he walks out. Look at the faith of the man. In exactly 1 hour, this man wakes up, fully cured. And then immediately all the allopaths say, hey, no, now you must rest because you have just recovered. They ask Dr. Ramchandra, he says, no, he can start his life. Get on. Don't stay in bed. And the fellow is alive, fully cured. This created a shockwave in the whole community. Nirod Baran, who is an allopath, he writes to Sri Aurobindo, if this is true, then we must throw away allopathy. We must all follow homeopathy. Sri Aurobindo has to explain it is not about pathy. So he explains many things, but I'll point which is relevant for our discussion now. He says there are 3 things. There's the instrumentation, which is the medicine. There's the instrument, which is the doctor. And there is what he calls factor X, which is the spiritual force. Instrumentation can be effective. Instrument can be more effective. Factor X can be even more effective. Alignment of all 3 will be your success. Okay? So now I'm coming to the main point of this. We have correspondence of Dr. Ramachandra with Sri Aurobindo. And in the correspondence, I don't remember exactly, so I'll give you in summary form a little bit of a variation. He writes something to Sri Aurobindo. Today I met so-and-so patient. I prayed to you and gave him such and such medicine. And I felt your force when I gave the medicine. And he writes the time, 3:30 p.m. So many letters like this. And then there's one letter, I don't know the exact time, but he writes, today I prayed, I felt your force and I gave this medicine. And in the margin, Sri Aurobindo writes 2:15 p.m. You understand? He's praying, asking for help. Sri Aurobindo sends the help and is conscious of the time. Writes it out in the margin. Just to point out that it's not just your imagination, it's real. And that is the factor X force working through him. And he's calling that consciously. How many doctors do you know who do this consciously? But they are the ones who are the miracle workers. So you need a strong, vital faith in your job. I know I can cure you. Imagine a doctor comes to you and he says, I don't know exactly the problem you have, but let's try this medicine. Maybe it'll work. Let's see after 2 or 3 days. If it doesn't work, we'll try another medicine. What is there? What will be the effect on you? You'll never go back to this doctor. Why? He does not give you faith. Instinctively, we feel the difference. Deepak Chopra documents a very interesting example where somebody in a hospital was dying of some kind of cancer. He was flat on bed, couldn't even get up. And the doctor says, by the way, there is this new medicine they're trying out. It's shown some hope, possibility. So if you like, we can experiment with you. So far, people who have tried it have got some good results. So they give him the medicine. In 1 week, the fellow gets up from bed and is walking around, greeting people and getting better by the day. At which point the doctor comes back. Oh, the trial is finished. They found the medicine was useless. But somehow it has worked on you, so let's continue. In 1 week, the fellow is back on the bed and he dies. You understand the power of faith, and the doctor transmitting the faith consciously or unconsciously, and the medicine conveying to the body. See, there's a very interesting thing which many people do, and I personally like to do this. I'm taking a paracetamol for whatever temperature control of the fever. I'll hold it on my tongue till my body feels the bitterness of the paracetamol, and it hits the body consciousness and triggers the faith in the body. Ah, yes, this bitterness, it will heal my fever. Then I swallow. You touch the body consciousness with what you do. Any medicine, you don't just swallow it, let it touch the body consciousness, trigger its response of familiarity. Ah, yes, this is the vibration that I need. Okay, so once you understand the principle, you can operate on many levels, and you recognize there is faith on many levels. There is a body consciousness faith, there is a life force faith, emotion faith, mind faith, and still deeper ranges of faith. And sometimes these are contradictory. You've seen perhaps people, you give them medicine, they get better, and then again there's a relapse. And if you observe carefully, there's a part which wants to get well, and there's another part which is afraid to get well or does not want to get well. Because if I get well now, again I'll have all those responsibilities which I'm trying to avoid. And again you'll try different therapies. It works and then relapses, works and relapses. Understand the contrary faith within. So in the integral yoga, you want the faith to be awakened in all these parts. All these I've elaborated to make you understand the importance of faith, but also the nuance of multiple layers and their faith. All parts of you must have the faith in relation to the divine, which would allow the full amplification of Shakti working through you. And this becomes then the Shakti Chatushtaya, the second limb of the integral yoga. Now you see here what you will put into practice. I've given you a big picture. Do not worry. Don't get confused by overwhelmed by the fullness of this. Recognize what you have to do. Build the faith consciously within you. And in everything that you have to do in your work, open to the working of Shakti to flow through you, and let the power amplify. Let the effectivity amplify. Let your knowledge, let your strength, let your courage, let your enjoyment and the working of abundance, Mahalakshmi, grow in you, and the servitude of the dasatva, of the Shudra Bhava, grow. All these to be grown to whatever degree natural for you, and the starting point which is natural to you. But eventually all this. Practical? Okay? So we have looked at two limbs. The first limb, which was Shanti Chatushtaya with the Samata, Shanti, Sukha, Hasya, very practical. The second limb, which is the Shakti Chatushtaya, and the various aspects of it, again, very practical. And let the faith grow. As the Shraddha grows, all the rest will rapidly happen. We come now to the third limb of the integral yoga. And this Sri Aurobindo calls Vijnana Chatushtaya. Vijnana, as you know, is supramental consciousness. It is above the mind. It is something much higher. It is not intellect or intelligence. It is something much higher. Fundamentally, a consciousness of oneness and infinity. It's the power by which the divine knows itself. Okay, doesn't matter what it means right now. I'm going to give a practical form to it, so that is the whole thing becomes accessible. What does this mean in practice? And again, 4 words. It's a Chatushtaya, so 4 words. The first of this is Jnanam, which in practice represents for us gradations of consciousness above our intelligence. You observe in the human being itself, there are people who are less conscious, more conscious. Intelligent in a practical sensory way, intelligent in an emotional way, intelligent in a rational way, intelligent in an intuitive way. So you see, there are gradations of consciousness, and we tend to oscillate between them. With young people, I give this example. When you prepare for an exam, And at the moment when you do the exam, you're in your most intense, heightened state of awareness. And then when you're finished, you fall back to your average normal. And then when you're very tired, you go into sub-normal grade. There is a daily oscillation around whatever is your average, we will say, grade of quality of consciousness of mind. But are there higher gradations? Obviously, because as we grew as children, we went up gradations, isn't it? We often tell a child, don't make a decision now for your life because you're not yet fully developed in your capacity of intelligence and perception and comprehension and so on, isn't it? That's what we are pushing to develop. And at a certain age, we will say, now you have reached some maturity. So you say, yes, now I've reached maturity, so I stop. Nothing more to do. Who said that's the end? What if there are further gradations? And yes, there are, of course. But those gradations are not primarily of intellect. They are gradations now more and more of an intuitive consciousness. This is so critical today because your intelligence is insufficient for what you have to do. I'll take an example from business. You have to decide now. A decision which, if you go wrong, in 1 year, you will lose your entire business. If you go right, your business will triple or amplify tenfold. On what will you make the decision? So you call a consultant and outsource the decision making. Consultant said do this. Consultant doesn't care. He has got his commission for his job. He has gone away. When your business collapses, he will say, sorry, we did our best. Will you give up your autonomy to him? Then you're not a good businessman. So the good businessman will take the consultant and take into account consultant also. But what do you do then? You seek a deeper knowledge which will be flawless, which will be sure. And the difference between the successful businessman and the failed businessman or half successful or unsuccessful businessman is this ability. There's actually a test which was done. It was a gathering of CEOs, about 100, let's say. And all of them were given an envelope placed before them. And they were all told inside the envelope is a number. Try to guess the number and write what is your guess. What a silly test, right? Okay, you make a guess, you write. Then they did an analysis. Those who got their number close enough to the actual number, they found had shown profit in the last 6 months. Those whose number deviated largely from the actual number had shown losses. Direct reference of your intuitive ability with your profitability. Because the reality is today, the data coming to you on which to take a decision is mostly fake. Almost everything you hear and receive today is fake. You know that. Most of the news is fake. It's all paid news. Even the letter of introduction and your CV is fake, made up by some AI. Articles, entire journals today run on fake AI-generated news. What is true? Everything is biased and slanted to somebody's advantage against you. You cannot rely on any data, first. Second, you're overwhelmed with data. Today in medical research, for example, every 4 months, you're doubling the quantum of data, of studies and tests. You don't have the time to keep up. By the time you're finished reading in those 4 months, it'll have doubled again. You're not capable of it, very simply. And still you don't know if it's reliable. And the third is, there is greater urgency to take a decision. In the past, you sent a letter. The letter took many days to reach, and the answer took many more days. Meanwhile, you could think. Now you got an SMS or an email or a message on your mobile. The fellow says, give your answer in the next 2 minutes. You don't have time to think. What do you do? The only resort you have is to the intuition. And this is the immediate next step in our evolution of consciousness above the intellect. For which then, for every next step, the prior step has to learn to become quiet and receptive to the higher. So there's a whole training for intuition, which Aurobindo teaches you. He gives you that, the 4 things to do to develop the intuitive consciousness. Of which the first is to be able to make your mind quiet and receptive at will for as long as needed. Being receptive, it can turn up or turn in. So the second method is this ability to shift in and thereby turn in, receive. So I'm not going to go into details. I would encourage you to read what Sri Aurobindo has to say. If you want a practical form in which you can put into practice, you can have a series of talks on this topic where we discuss gradations, higher levels of consciousness, and how to reach that. You'll find those online. But there is a process, and this is part of the integral yoga. The ascent of consciousness from the intellect upward, all the way through the intuition, and through the intuition to something still higher, with whatever names we give, they are not important, eventually to that which is the highest divine gradation of knowledge, which he calls the supermind. That's the Vijnana. So the first word of this Chatushtaya, of the Vijnana Chatushtaya, is Jnanam, knowledge, but higher gradations of knowledge, and the ascent vertically, first to intuition and the rest. Doable. Very practical. And I've said this sometimes to young people because I say, if you can do a measurement of your IQ and from there follow these processes which Sri Aurobindo teaches you, I guarantee an IQ shift of minimum 20 points. If your IQ is 100 or 110, minimum guarantee 120, 130 I can get you. And I will say this from my own personal experience, because I put these into practice at an early stage in my childhood because I had access to that knowledge and I took the trouble and interest to follow it. At the age of 10, I had heard that, oh, you can stop your thoughts. So in the school, we used to sit at the start, they would have the music for 5 minutes. People would basically daydream and close eyes, sometimes half sleep. And I did that for a long time. Then I said, why am I wasting my time? I was told that we can stop thoughts. Let's try. And I started to practice how to stop thoughts. Now imagine if this had been taught formally in the class. It's something so basic. If you can learn to quiet your thoughts, you can learn to direct your thoughts at will. You can learn to maintain focus of thoughts for as long as you want in the direction you want. Mind mastery is a basic skill you must have. Who teaches? Nobody. And when you start doing, and you can do it at the age of 10, I've done it, it's not a big deal. And I did it the difficult way. Then I learned there are easier ways. So I will start today by teaching the easier ways to the young people. And one of the consequences of this is then you can consciously open to intuition. So as a result of some very basic practice, I was basically fooling around with whatever little I'd heard. When I did my first IQ test at the age of 15, it hit 150. No big deal. It was effortless. And I'm assuring you, I can take any child today and bring them to that point if they follow these processes that Sri Aurobindo teaches for the integral yoga for amplification of your power of intelligence. You see how practical this knowledge is. And nobody says this to the young people. What do you say? Oh, come and offer flowers and do bhakti, feel good, go home. Maybe you do that, but don't tell the young people you have to do that because they say, no, but I want to develop my capacity and intelligence. I want to attain success. I want the power to be effective. I want to achieve these things, attain my purushartha. This is what the integral yoga is going to give you the means to do. Follow this. Imagine if you present it in this way. And yes, it is intended for this. Because you want to fulfill yourself in life as a divine instrument. You can't be flawed and incapable. You have to master the most difficult circumstances, isn't it? The greatest battles in that sense. So Vijnana, Chatushtaya, first step is Jnanam and the upward movement. Second is Trikala Drishti. I will touch upon this, but it's not so essential for us right now, but it is a consequence of this. As the consciousness opens out and heightens, with it comes a wideness of consciousness. Not only an opening to infinity, but as I said earlier, also the sense of eternity. And therefore the perception in that slightly higher grade above, and it's not too high above, also has a sense of expanse of space and time. So when you think, your thought are not small pieces of ideas. Normally, I think one idea followed by another, followed by another. Your mind operates now in large chunks of ideas. A group of ideas. Bam, I see this as a whole. Where earlier the lesser intelligence would hop, tut, 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 and then try to assemble and jump around, I see the whole in one go. And then when I articulate, I can flow like this, I can flow like that, I can go like that in whichever way I want. Sequence of articulation is sequential. Here I'm in parallel, holding the full body of a single large idea. But with it also a single perspective which expands beyond the immediate, sees into the future and the past. And you see here the first sense of what Trikala Drishti would be like. And again, I point out it's not difficult. This first step is not difficult. From there, it is a consequence of the ascending, widening consciousness. And in the highest, it is the natural state of that consciousness. But the process begins here from the point that you begin to interiorize your awareness and open to something higher in a state of quiet receptivity of mind and emotions. The intuitions flow, but with them the perceptions also across time and space flow. You meet somebody, and as he speaks, yes, this part is true, but there's something mixed. Something else happened, and you have a glimpse of what that is, what happened. Or as a consequence of this, you see, yes, this is going to happen, it's inevitable, and it's obvious. So the sense of perception of the immediate past or immediate future, or even the long-term sense of the future potential, is spontaneously available as a consequence of this, because of the shift in state of consciousness. And when it happens, you're not surprised because it's natural. All of us have had such glimpses at some time or other. You didn't know why it happened or how it happened, and it was unreliable generally. But with this deepening of consciousness, this becomes more frequent, more reliable, and you have conscious access to this whenever you need. And this is within our reach, without too much effort. The third word in this Chatushtaya then is Ashta Siddhi. Interesting, you've heard of Siddhis, powers of various kinds, and they're typically classically 8. And obviously in the more ascetic things, they'll say, shun the Siddhis, you don't want powers, they will corrupt you, your ego will take over. Yes, all that is, warnings are good, they're important. But as the consciousness shifts higher and deeper, the ego sense begins to thin. And a natural to that consequence, to that consciousness, are also these powers and faculties. I don't go into them, it's not important for us, but one of them, which I will highlight, is the power to influence events or perceive events. Absolutely necessary if you want to be effective in life. You have to be able to sense the mood of where things are going. Let me give an example here. The most powerful, the most effective in the stock market play are not the people who do analysis of stock market. They're the people who sense the trend of the energy of stock market. You understand what that means? You feel the stock market, you can feel, oh my God, now it's overstretched, it's going to collapse next. You feel it. You feel the energy which is acting, and you respond in advance. You get the feel of what I'm saying. It would be the same in every industry. Many industries are cyclic. Shipping industry, for example, globally is cyclic. Everyone knows that. To predict when the downturn happens or the upturn happens, you can use analysis. Doesn't always work. Like stock market prediction, doesn't always work. Sometimes it's hit and miss. But when you feel, you know, you catch it. So the effectivity which this brings to you is one of the things which will give you effectivity in life generally, to sense trends, and the other is to influence and modify trends as well as people. An effective leader is one who is able to carry people with them. You felt this when you were with a good leader. You feel protected, you feel carried somehow. Their command for you becomes spontaneously your action. When you meet such people and you feel good in their company, you will be happy to follow them. But there are also people who have this power. When you are in their influence, you have decided to say, no, I will refuse him. The fellow says, will you do this? Okay. Afterwards, I come out, why did I say okay? Oh my God, I regret. I decided not to say, what happened? I felt compelled, I couldn't help it. And that is the influence they had on you. This is constant. It is, you may call it charisma, you can call it influence, fascination. There are many words, even a kind of hypnosis, you may say. But all effective leaders have this power to compel and carry people with them. It can be a lower vital power or it can be a higher spiritual power. And I'll give an example of this. You know the story of Joan of Arc. This young girl who becomes an instrument for the Shakti of the Divine Mother, who saves an entire country. She walks out from the village with no capacity of any training of any kind. She goes to the king and says, I will lead your army to victory. She can hardly lift a sword. She learns to ride a horse and leads the army to victory. And there's one event which is so amazing. In front of this whole English army, French army with her behind her. She is about to lead the charge. And the inspiration makes her step down from the horse, or maybe on the horse. She goes up to the English army and says, I see a sea of blood. You will all die. Go back before you are killed. And the entire army turns around and walks away. She has won the battle. What an extraordinary achievement. What an extraordinary achievement. And a woman, in those days, you did not look up to a woman as a warrior, at least in Europe. And she does this. What is the power that led and compelled them, convinced them to walk away? This is the spiritual power of Vashita or Aishwarya. Vashikarana, we say, no? To bring into possession, to grip. But this is something of a much larger spiritual force, and this is what we're talking about as one of the Ashtasiddhis. When you have that, you can mold circumstances, lead people, lead them to heroic action that they were not capable of, because you become a point of influence to lift and awaken, inspire and guide. Napoleon has escaped from prison. The entire army is sent to seize him. They come face to face. He's alone and the whole army is there to arrest him. He speaks to them, convinces them to join him, and goes back with the whole army as his to conquer the king who sent the army. You see the power here. It cannot be purely vital power. Of course, vital power is one of the ways, but this is an inferior grade of working of a spiritual power. And so it was one of the Ashtasiddhis and the other powers. But all of these are intended. They are actually faculties and powers of the higher consciousness in the world, which are being used by the higher consciousness all the time. But you become now a conscious instrument for their amplification in you. So the third thing is Ashtasiddhi, and the fourth is Samadhi, which again I'll only touch upon, that in the Vijnana Chatushtaya, the access to the higher ranges of consciousness and the inner ranges means also access to the worlds corresponding to those. Some of these are worlds which you only enter in a dream state. You go into very beautiful heavenly spaces, sometimes into dark spaces, and they're actually worlds and worlds unendingly in the vital worlds, mental worlds, and the spiritual worlds. And the spiritual worlds are some of the most beautiful, more beautiful than anything you can imagine, where oneness and bliss is the very substance of all that exists. And the full range of all these worlds are meant to be yours to explore. Not just the physical world, which is just like a condensation and coarse version of all those higher worlds. To be a conscious divine participant in this creation, you have full access to all the worlds to be explored. We are right now bound in the prison of the body senses only. And as these inner and higher ranges of consciousness open, you begin to have access, perceptions on those ranges, and with that you begin to experience all these worlds. This is intended for you. And it is this which is the Samadhi portion of the Chatushtaya. And all this is part of Vijnana Chatushtaya. Broadly, you can see it is the opening to the inner and higher ranges of consciousness. So we have looked at three Chatushtayas, the Shanti Chatushtaya, Shakti Chatushtaya, amplification of all powers, and Vijnana Chatushtaya, which is the opening to the inner and higher. And we come to the fourth, which is Sharira Chatushtaya. Sharira, body. Perfection of the body is a consequence of the higher ranges of consciousness now filling the body itself. Remember, we spoke right at the beginning about this. The body is your instrument. But you can't start with the body and say, I'll make my body perfect, then I will make my mind perfect, then I'll reach the spiritual. It is stupid. Why? Because body's perfection will give you an inferior capacity. Even mind's perfection has an inferior capacity. When you reach the spiritual consciousness, even if imperfect, its power is 1,000,000-fold greater than mind or body. So get to an imperfect higher consciousness, and from there you transform the lower. You will have achieved the same thing 1,000 times faster and easier and with greater joy, because you already have the higher joy there. So as rapidly as possible, this is a strategy in the integral yoga, as rapidly as possible, get to the highest poise you can, from there turn and bring that down to change everything. Having done that, again rapidly get to the highest poise you can, and from there turn and change everything. The result is what would take 1,000 years of slow, laborious evolution can be achieved sometimes within a few weeks or months, and without exaggeration. There are letters or recordings of the mother telling people, one of these, I have a letter from where my teacher, MP Pandit, records. The mother says to him, in the last few weeks, you have grown the equivalent of several lifetimes. Do you realize what that means? Several lifetimes. Many, many hundred years of evolution have been compressed in a few weeks. And that's normal. It's not a big deal. This is how the yoga should be. Otherwise, it's not yoga, isn't it? This acceleration of the evolution. We want to achieve 1,000,000 years of slow evolution of nature into one lifetime. Then it's yoga. If you're growing at the same pace as someone who's not doing yoga, you're not doing yoga. Let me highlight this a little bit, because people say, I'm doing yoga. How much have you grown in the last 1 year? Same as your neighbor who's not doing yoga? Then you didn't do yoga. Minimum, you should be 10 times more. Then you have done yoga. Because Swami Vivekananda says compression of 1,000 years into one lifetime. So minimum 10x. Yes, I've grown. Sometimes it will happen when there's a rapid growth, you look back, and what was 1 month ago feels like another lifetime, or what happened a few years ago you feel like is a different lifetime. I'm not the same person, I've changed so much. That should be a normal reference. Then you're doing the sadhana well. Okay? So use this as a reference to remind, and if you feel you have not done, now get into the sadhana. There is no time to waste. So the Sharira Chatushtaya now is putting all this from above down in relation to the body. What do you do with the body? And again, there are 4 words. First is Arogyam, health, perfect health. Should be a consequence of the higher force working in you. And perfect health is a necessary consequence of the integral yoga, is necessary for the yoga itself. Now, all of these blend into all the other chatushtayas. So the faith, you remember, in the body makes a difference, change the body's faith, etc. Second, in the Sharira Chatushtaya is Utthapana, literally translated as levitation. But if you go to the root sense, levity means lightness. It is the dissolution or freedom from inertia in the body itself. The body feels light. The body is carried now by the higher consciousness. It feels full of this force, and it is plastic and conscious. The tamas becomes less and less, up to the point where literally, if you so willed it, you could even change the weight of the body. But that's not the goal. The goal is the freedom from inertia. Now, there are actually experiments which are recorded, and I've interviewed somebody who was the son of the maid of Sri Aurobindo. Okay? Early years, there was a maid who was cleaning the room. Her son became mother's driver later, Bala. We interviewed him, and he said, I don't know if his mother or grandmother, she was afraid of Sri Aurobindo. Why? She says, oh, he's a big magician. Why? So she says she would be sweeping in the room, and she would see Sri Aurobindo sometimes with his arm and leg like this in the air. What is this strange position? What is this man doing? And he's up like that for hours. Now, in the record of yoga, where Sri Aurobindo has noted literally the development of his sadhana, he points out, he calls it Utthapana of right hand, right leg, 6 hours, 8 hours, no fatigue. You hold your arm up for 10 minutes, you'll get tired. He's holding it for a few hours, no tiredness. Interesting. That is one of the consequences in the body, siddhi of the body, the perfection of the body consciousness. No fatigue. You can be working all the time, doing anything required, no tiredness. And good health. You see, so health and also lightness, freedom from inertia. And he's like this for hours together. Then the interesting part, I'm coming back to the story. Sometimes she's sweeping and she's seeing, oh, this magician, he's doing all this, I'm scared. And then she looks, he's not there in the chair. He's vanished. She's scared, she looks away, does the sweeping, looks back, oh, he's back. This is the only example we know of somebody who saw Sri Aurobindo during that period in the intimacy of his room. So it seems as if from her description that at certain points, his body was almost transparent or vanished to her sight at least. Interesting. There are many things he was doing, but the perfection of the body literally should make it able to do whatever is required by the higher consciousness, gripping your body to shape it. It's not so complicated when you think about it. What does a gymnast do in the Olympics? What the mind wills, the body perfectly does. What spirit wills now, the body should be able to do perfectly, more perfectly than the mind's, right? So if you think about it logically, it makes sense. To what extent it can go, we have these glimpses of Sri Aurobindo, or what he describes should be eventually the perfection of the body, where each cell of your body will be conscious, not just self-conscious, conscious of the divine consciousness and open to the divine working. And finally, it will work not by the law of the inferior habit of inertia, but by the will of the divine consciousness. And the divine consciousness being essentially immortal and ever fresh and ever young, the cells of the body which live by the divine will would effectively be ageless. Somewhere deep inside us, it resonates with a deep truth in us. Of course, I should be forever. I will never die. Have you felt that? You look at yourself, how can I die? I'm permanent. Yeah, my body is decaying, but I don't know why it shouldn't be. You feel it is a falsehood. And it's true, it is a falsehood. Aging is a falsehood. Death is a falsehood. To be is your truth, spiritual truth, and your body must follow this and live and express the truth of your spirit. And so the perfection of the body would, as a consequence, lead to the ability for the body to remain ever young for as long as you choose. It doesn't mean you have to live on in the same body. You could say, okay, now I'm going to shed the body. You're free to do that. But as long as you keep it, you should be able to live ever young, potentially, right? And if this can be done by the spiritual force, of course, it can also be done by inferior methods, but with limited capacity. Today, with some of the genetic explorations, I don't know if you're aware, there's one Dr. David Sinclair who's actually developed or found in the biology at a cellular level machinery pathways by which the cell can be made to regenerate unendingly. They take any tissue of the body and cells, and you can accelerate the aging, and then age regress back to youth, and accelerate again, and age regress any number of times back and forth. That shows you within the biology is the inherent capacity to remain young forever. And when the mother went into the cellular consciousness as part of this working of her work of the transformation of the body and consciousness and cells, she discovered, she said, the cells don't need to die. They die only by prior memory and habit. Aging and death are a prior habit. Because so many times they've been driven to fail because of incapacity that they say, oh yeah, now I'm supposed to fail because it's time to fail. But when the same cells are turned in alignment to the divine will, they remember their immortality and the divine immortality. They live then without aging, without death. It's fascinating. But this would be one of the culminations and consequences of the perfection of the body. But I'm digressing, and remember, this is not the goal. This is an incidental consequence of the goal itself, which is general divinization of the body consciousness. The third of the Sharira Chatushtaya is then Saundaryam, beauty. There has to be a spontaneous beauty, elegance, harmony, not only in the form of the body, but in its actions, in its expressions. It's obvious. The mother points out that in the world of matter, which is domain of form, ugliness is equivalent to falsehood in the domain of mind. See, to tell a lie in mind is equivalent to have perversion, distortion, or ugliness in the physical world. In other words, truth in mind is equivalent to beauty in the physical world. You see our civilization when almost all, but especially in India, the aesthetic value of the civilization in the greatest temples and art, architecture, paintings, sculptures, philosophies, literature it created, you see the beauty that you find. Look at the condition today. Your temples are often the dirtiest. People spit, they throw trash, they throw plastic, garbage, waste. Why? It's a fallen civilization. Why did it fall? It turned away from life and matter, saying all this is illusion, that alone is true. It does not matter if you abandon the world, the body, all that is Jagat Mithya, falsehood, dump it, forget it. So with it, beauty, and the effectivity of the world were also thrown away. The recovery will not take place by the ascetic awakening. Therefore, the youth have to turn away from the ascetic sadhana to take a world embracing stance, even if it involves losing the spiritual momentarily, in order to then come back with this embrace of the world and mastery of the world. But what I'm saying is, if you make them conscious of the goals and means of the integral yoga, you do not have to abandon the spirit to master life. You can master life with the power of the spirit. This should be our way forward, isn't it? Do you agree? Should this not be part of our education itself? And should this not be the goal itself of our life for everybody? Spirituality is not abandonment of life, it is mastery of life, perfection of life, divinization and beauty and enjoyment and fulfillment of everything you do in life. This is the spirituality of the integral yoga. This is the spirituality of the Indian civilization, of the Veda itself. And the final step of the Sharira Chatushtaya is Vividhananda, delight in all activities, through all senses, in all means. Sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch, all are variations of Ananda, of bliss, which should be a consequence of all the other stages. In the body itself, you experience this. Body experiences delight and Ananda, not just deeper ranges of consciousness. So that's why the Sharira Chatushtaya comes after Vijnana, because the higher consciousness now infusing into it makes all this possible. But again, if you look at these first four limbs of the yoga, you can begin parallelly on all of them. Certainly start building the faith in the body and build its health, build its saundarya and beauty, elegance. All this would be a part of it, isn't it? Work on it, all parallelly. Whatever you can, start now. There are two more Chatushtayas. I will very quickly run through them just to complete the topic. There's the Karma Chatushtaya, in which now you become a conscious instrument of the divine Shakti working in the world. Again, it has four aspects. And there's the Brahma Chatushtaya, in which all is then seen through the perception of the divine infinite consciousness. All this is seen as Brahman, and there is the infinity in everything, in every touch, in every experience underlying. You have the sense of the infinity that fills, and you see the underlying wisdom of the infinite divine consciousness working, and the bliss behind all which works through everything. That is the last of the Chatushtaya, which will be a consequence of all the others. So at the moment, we don't need to worry about it. But every time you have a glimpse of something beautiful, of the underlying presence, well, it is leading you into this perception. Small steps towards that. Review now. First, the overall base of integrating your life and turning it around, your aspiration turned to the higher and the relationship with the Divine Mother. Build this integration. That's your base. Basic purification, centering around your psychic, its influence and its aspiration. Then begins the proper yoga and the six limbs. First, you have the Shanti Chatushtaya. Remember Samatha and Shanti? Build on this. Spend time every day. Start your day with a settling in a deeper equality and peace. There's a guided meditation that I've put online, for which I've called the guided meditation for descent of peace. It's not a visualization. Visualization has its place, but this is not visualization. It is centering above the head, where you feel the peace and invoke the peace to flow down into you. Take a look at that. You will find it on YouTube, Guided Meditation for Descent of Peace. If you find it helpful, use it. Otherwise, simply remember, feel the deep sense of the presence and peace that you feel in spaces like this. Recall, relive, let it invade you from above, from within, from behind. And let the equality now consciously be cultivated in all activities of life. Second, Chatushtaya, Shakti Chatushtaya, amplification of all the powers, soul powers, nature powers, effectivity in life, perfection of all your potential in the intensification of the powers. Again, as I said, not on immediate priority, but certainly through the immediate means of your Swabhava, let that amplify. Third, Vijnana Chatushtaya, deepening and heightening of your consciousness, opening to the intuition and the inner and higher ranges which follow as a consequence. Start the work on that, for which The Shanti Chatushtaya is a base. Making your mind quiet as a practice would be your means to open. And then fourth is Sharira Chatushtaya. Let your body become healthy, strong, conscious. For which do asanas, do pranayam if that helps. But make it conscious. And turn in the body awareness in relation to the Divine Mother. Feel, give yourself to her, receive her force in you. And other consequences which would follow from it, the beauty and the levity, lightness which will also follow. Work on these consciously. And generally the delight and joy in all activities that you would follow would blend into this. And all the rest would follow as a consequence of being a conscious instrument of the divine. So here is broadly the framework of the integral yoga. As you can see, it can all go parallelly, but all of this is meant to make you an effective instrument of the divine, but also fulfill the purpose for which you were born, for which you took birth. It's not as if the divine will is different from your will, because you are one with the divine. So when we speak of following the divine will, it is also fulfilling your soul's deepest aspiration and will. They're not different. And this is the nature of the dharma. Swadharma is aligned to the larger dharma of the universe. It is not contradictory. So you have total freedom of your individual uniqueness. At the same time, you have a perfect alignment of harmony with the larger divine working in the world. And there is no contradiction. So such is the broad structure and framework of the integral yoga. As I said, very broad. But now recognize there is a very different approach. And so radically different that for many, even to look at this becomes too overwhelming. And it's the reason why there is so much confusion. People come with old ideas that come from the old religious and ascetic traditions and try to implant this into the integral yoga. All they have done, and you'll see this in many houses, you had your traditional deities, you swapped them, put mothers and Sri Aurobindo's picture and said, yes, now I'm doing integral yoga. No, you are not. Don't fool yourself. And that's not the point. Simply to switch devotion from one form to another. That's not the point at all. You can be a bhakta, does not make you a sadhaka. Having devotion is good, certainly it's a good start, but sadhaka is one who does the sadhana. Devotee is different from disciple. A disciple is one who follows a discipline, isn't it? So my intention in this session was to broadly present to you the framework of this discipline to follow. Start with what is easiest. Remind yourself of the overall framework again and again, and little things will pop up naturally. Allow them to grow. But start with what is easiest for you. The rest, trust and ask for help. Invoke the mother. Open yourself to her working in you. And the more this happens, the more rapidly all these movements will begin to be organized in you and built in you. So this is the broad framework with which I will pause and look back first for yourself, what you can put into practice. Second, what you can assist the younger generations in your family to put into practice. This is one of the great failures of all of us, to have not transmitted the same values to our children, hoping that because they grew up in the atmosphere it will happen. No, it will not. Because the outside atmosphere, which is contrary to this and hostile to this, is more powerful, and they're exposed to that for 23 hours out of 24. And perhaps even that 1 hour you don't give to them. You must consciously speak of this and with your own example spread it. It's the reason why in all of our centers you will see not enough young people. I'll speak about this tomorrow, but this is our failure. You have to speak up. If the other side is consciously trying to reach out to them and grab them to make them slaves to the larger machinery of economic interests, let's say, or political interests, you need to reach out and help them wake up to their purpose of life. As parents, as teachers, and for those of us in the university as faculty, this also is part of our work. Do not think of this as, oh, it's not my subject, it's not my responsibility. If your child is in your responsibility for anything, the spiritual direction, which is your life's purpose, is also part of your responsibility. You may say, I don't know how to lead them in that. That's a different story. But it is definitely a part of your responsibility. You cannot separate spiritual from life. There is only one spiritual life. Life is spiritual, without the spiritual, life is meaningless. And without life, the spirituality is empty and hollow and theoretical. There is only spiritual life. This is so important, the mother goes so far as to say in one of her statements, Sri Aurobindo came on earth to teach humanity that there is no separation between life and the spiritual life. There is only one. To that extent, she goes even to bring back this unity of the two. So, let's take a moment to review what you will put into practice and what you will transmit also to others, to the younger generations, to your students, to your children, to your friends, whatever form it may take, but on the basis of your own application in practice. Otherwise, what you speak does not have the force of conviction. But think about this, take a moment to dwell upon it, and most of all, recognize that this path has been built up by Sri Aurobindo and the mother. You see, the pioneer of a yoga has to go through all the difficulties while building the path, and then shares with you the framework that has been built up and developed, and the path which has been cut. Now you flow with the current of the help that flows along the path. It did not exist before. It has been formed. So as you align to them, allow them to fill you and carry you, you flow along the path. Recognize the work they have done to hew out, build this path. And be grateful for this gift for humanity. Whether we choose to take advantage of it or not, the gift has been given for all humanity. And as a consequence, the destiny of humanity in its spiritual awakening and divinization of life is certain. Whether it takes 100 years or 1,000 years is now irrelevant. It will happen. And all those in the world, even if they don't know Sri Aurobindo and the mother by name, when they open to this higher inspiration, will find themselves drawn in this broadly in this direction. And this is in fact the case. And I've met many from different traditions, sometimes no tradition, who find themselves spontaneously lifted and carried by this current of the help that has been created in this path, that is the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. So let's take a moment in concentration, in gratitude, and in conviction and aspiration to put into practice. May the Divine Mother lead our steps, and may we all join together now in conscious aspiration as we chant Om together 3 times. Wait. Namaste.